Thank you. That's carried by those who were there. Right, public participation. One person did express an interest in speaking, but we have been dealing with the issues raised all week, and that person has withdrawn participation for this meeting because of those arrangements that we've made. So hopefully that will lead to some positive progress on the matter in hand. So without further ado, I haven't got any announcements to make, so sorry. The Destination Zero annual progress report, and Matt Barker's going to talk to that subject.
Thank you very much. Yeah, as mentioned, this is the latest Destination Zero annual report, something I do every year to chart our progress against some of the key measures that are included in Destination Zero. Obviously you have the detailed report as part of your agenda pack, but I thought I would just pick out a few of the key bits of information as part of a little presentation on screen. And I'm first going to start with our own emissions as a council over that year. So what you can see here is a chart which really sets out the sources of our emissions as a council. And nothing has really changed. As previously reported, the real big hitters here are the waste fleet, accounted for 44% of our total emissions, and then the two significant buildings, Malvern Theatres and Malvern Splash. And that obviously really points to where the most urgent action is needed, or the most significant areas to target are going to be if we're to reach our net zero goals by 2030. Obviously there are many other sources, including other buildings, but in relative terms they're quite small in the grand scheme of things. I also chart there year on year how we're doing in terms of actual emissions recorded along that since the baseline in 2018-19, and this graph shows how we fared over those years. You can see the 2020, the impact of COVID and COVID restrictions was obviously quite significant, with the expected bounce back from that. But since that time, emissions have started to fall yet again, and following that broad trajectory down towards 2030. We've seen a 24% reduction on our emissions since that 2018-19 baseline, which is obviously great. But this chart also points to the work that is still to be done, that we need to keep moving forward in order to reach those 2030 goals. Just then wanted to look at some specific aspects of our emissions, and the first thing I'd like to turn to is our waste fleet. Obviously the single biggest source, as I mentioned, at 44%. A really sort of big success story, I guess, for the council in recent years has been the impact and the implementation of HVO, the hydrotreated vegetable oil, as a direct replacement for diesel in our waste fleet. Now, we started with that initial tranche of 5 vehicles, and this is the data I have for the impact that that's had so far. 189 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent reduction from using HVO in those 5 vehicles, compared to the pre-HVO years that we didn't use it at all. And the use of HVO has led to a 28% reduction on our 2018-19 baseline. So it's already had a really significant impact on our emissions. And the better news from that is that we'll see more savings from the next monitoring year for 24-25, as we now have the wider spread use of HVO across all compatible waste fleet vehicles. So again, when I come and report this next year, the drop's going to be even further and even more impactful as a result. And so that's really puts a big dent into us achieving that 2030 goal. Next, moving on to the buildings. The council house, we've seen the purchase of renewable energy in recent years, and the real benefit of that is our ability to use that as an offset against emissions. And you can see the impact in the red line on that graph between 2022 and 23, the impact that that's had. It's quite significant. The council house is small in the grand scheme of things, but it just shows the impact of that purchase of renewable energy and what that can do for us. In quite significant news, we've put in bids on a number of buildings, but for the council house specifically this time, for the public sector decarbonisation scheme. Now that is for capital funding to replace existing gas fossil fuel heating system with air source heat pumps instead, which are run from electricity. The move from gas to electric heating is the really big steps that we need to make in order to achieve net zero, and needs to be implemented across all of our buildings. So bidding for funding from the government to achieve that is obviously the step that we need to take. Then moving on to the bigger buildings. Now, more than Splash, we've already seen a lot of work undertaken on energy efficiency, renewable energy over the last year or so, and obviously more recently the new solar panels that have been installed on the roof. That's all really good, necessary things we need to do in order to decarbonise that building. But obviously the time will come at some point ultimately where we need to replace the heating system with the electric's air source heat pump. And we need to do that when the time is right and when the funding eligibility is there. But in putting in those energy efficiency measures in the interim means we're in a far better place when we do swap over heating systems to make the most effective use of those. More than theatres, similar to the council house, we've been able to put in that bid to the public sector decarbonisation scheme, again to replace existing heating systems with air source heat pumps. And just to sort of give you an order of magnitude really, we think that could save around 200 tonnes of CO2 equivalent per year. That's roughly about 2/3 of the building's total at the moment. So it would make a huge difference to our carbon emissions to install these systems. And then moving on to our district-wide emissions, we get data from the government for our local authority area, and we have that data from 2005. And on the graph here, you can see how we've fared over that time. A quite steady reduction year on year, following that trajectory down to 2050. It's been quite steady as time has gone on. What I can also get from that data is how 6 different sectors have performed. And you can see on screen here, for each of those sectors, the change from 2005 to 2022, which is the most recent data published that we have. And I'd like to focus on the 2 biggest areas, domestic and transport, our biggest emitted sectors. Domestic emissions have fallen gradually over time, as you can see. They started levelling off around sort of COVID and sort of following years. But we actually saw a big dip for 2022. This actually follows a national trend, and the cited reasons are the relatively mild winter, but also significantly the energy price rises, meaning people using less energy and therefore producing less carbon emissions as a result. And then looking at transport, you can see the dip there for 2020 with COVID restrictions in place, people moved around less. We have seen a return, a bounce back as expected, and that has happened again for 2022, although we haven't yet returned to pre-COVID levels, so it'd be interesting to see whether that happens or we start moving back down the other way. And then finally from me, renewable energy generation is data I also am able to get from the government. Solar photovoltaics is the biggest one for us and almost the sole one in Malvern Hills. It makes up pretty much all of the total, but that has been growing quite steadily year on year as well. You can see the brown and green lines, landfill gas and plant biomass, that stopped quite abruptly in 2018. That's because the government no longer provides us data to local authority level for those. So those things are still sources of generation, albeit small, but we no longer have data for it, so we can't track it. That's all from me, but obviously happy to take any questions.
Councillor Victory.
Thank you, Chairman. I noticed that all of the graphs only show up until 2023. It would be enormously helpful if they actually included the year after that, for which figures would be complete by now. Thank you.
Is this for the district-wide data?
Each graph that you have shown, like this one, ends at 2023. We're now in 2025.
Yeah, it's the latest data available. Basically, the government publish data around July every year, but it is behind. So the latest data I have at the moment is for 2022. So in July 2025, I'll get 2023's data. So yeah, there is a couple of years lag on it, unfortunately.
Just to say, Malcolm, if you go back to the report presented last year, that was to 2022. So it's consistent. It's frustrating, but there is a time lag in the information provided.
It's very hard for us as councillors to really make a valid judgment on how we're doing if the figures are 2 years out of date.
You won't find us disagreeing.
I'm not saying it's your fault, I'm just saying it's wrong.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Wells? No. Oh, I thought you wanted to ask a question. Councillor Nielsen.
Thanks so much, Matt. Very useful presentation. Just wondering if you could give us an idea of how much Scope 3 emissions might amount to for us as a council and the district. And obviously the paper notes that Scope 3 emissions, the reporting is not very sort of consistent at this point. But I'm assuming Scope 3 emissions probably reporting is beginning to become much more accepted in terms of the conventions. So is there a sort of target for us to report on Scope 3? And roughly, again, what sort of proportion would it amount to of emissions? Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah. So Scope 3 can be it's anything in the council's supply chain, anything that we might purchase, for example, and it has been traditionally quite hard to measure because you need to understand the carbon involved in buying a printer or a bit of paper, but it is becoming increasingly, that information is becoming increasingly available. We don't do it yet, but whether in future we can do, I think it would depend on things like procurement strategy. So we ask when we go out to procurement for an organisation to tell us the carbon impact of whatever we're procuring from them, be that a good or service. So we don't do it yet, but yes, it's something we could look at doing in future. In terms of potential impacts, it's hard to quantify exactly for the council, but I've read reports from the LGA on the matter, and they reckon it could be realistically around 80% of the council's total true carbon footprint. So well in excess of what we actually produce directly here as an organisation. So it is going to be an increasingly important issue, I think.
Given that it is becoming much more accepted and that it could be 80%, and I think that's a commonly quoted number, therefore, it's sort of like the iceberg, really, isn't it? We're measuring the tip of the iceberg, and the below the sea level bit we're not measuring at all. I just wondered, would we have an idea of when is it practical to start now? When might we start? What would you recommend?
It's difficult for me to answer here because it relies on other policies and procedures that I'm not solely in control of. So, obviously it's theoretically possible to do, but it's something that perhaps through the Destination Zero review we could look at the potential for.
Councillor Michael.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to use all my ammunition up because I think we're having a meeting tomorrow, aren't we? Or Thursday? Yes. Thursday, beg your pardon, yeah. Regarding transport, which is obviously one of the biggest emitters, does that include all transport, rail, cars, lorries, or?
So you can see that on the heading of there, you can see it's in the brackets, within the scope of influence of local authorities. So what that means, it includes most transport but omits national infrastructure.
Right.
So it doesn't include rail or motorways.
Fine.
And some bigger A roads that might be adopted by Highways England, but anything else, yes, it would include.
Just a couple of add-ons from that. Obviously, are you expecting quite a drop with the government's insistence on everybody moving to electric vehicles by 2030? So we should see a substantial drop in that graph. Do you anticipate?
Yes, yeah. I think we should. That's what the graph at the moment doesn't really really
it's
show.
pretty
And
static, isn't it?
And with 2 years behind as well,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
so to date, any sort of efficiencies in engines that have been brought about have been pretty much offset by the growth of car use and the number of cars on the road. So that's why you've sort of this bit of a stalemate that the graph sort of shows. But yeah, as more and more electric cars come on the road, you will see bigger drops start to occur.
And finally, if I can just ask about the fact that obviously we're relying on the renewable energy through photovoltaic systems, aren't we? Are we confident that with the increase that you're putting into all these buildings, etc., that we have sufficient capacity to meet that demand?
Yeah, that's a really key question, and it's the heat pumps also have a bearing on that as well, for the electricity that they take to run them. I don't foresee any particular problems from what I understand at this moment with our buildings individually, but as a district, nationwide infrastructure problem, yes, significant infrastructure upgrades are needed all across the country. I can't answer with any more specifics yet. We haven't encountered an issue at this point.
Just picking up the point about EV cars. I was reading an article today. Apparently, Norway's last year, 90% of all cars sold in Norway were EV. In the UK, it was 20%. So nationally, and national policy has a long way to go to drive that change of behaviour, I think.
This is the issue I had about whether we're going to have the generating capacity for all these heat pumps, cars coming on the road, etc., in greater and greater volumes, that's all.
Councillor Wilde.
Actually, following on with the EV question, on page 16 of your report, it's in the red for, oh sorry, I haven't got my glasses on, staff and councillor travel. And one thing I have noticed is I'm an EV owner, and when I fill out the form, there's no capacity for me to say I'm an EV owner, and so you're recording it as if I'm a car, and so our figures will be not as correct as we want them to be, and we're only slightly in the red. So I'm thinking that if we change that and we had a policy about who we pay mileage to and what the level is, then that could tip us back into the green. On a bigger topic, which is the domestic chart there, we are showing leadership by getting our own house in order. But for the district, how are we progressing with getting people on board in terms of insulation, etc., change of habits? And that is the biggest message that we're going to be giving out as a council to reduce all our carbon emissions. So how are we doing?
Yeah, on the domestic side, first and foremost, I mean, our housing team do a lot of work getting external funding to offer grants, advice to people on how they can not only save money, but obviously save energy and save carbon. But what they get's a drop in the ocean of the support that's needed out there, and that's the real issue. Even a few million doesn't go very far when you're talking about improvements to people's homes. So that's the challenge. How do we influence the wider public with very, very limited resources? And So the housing team do a great job with what they can influence, but it is obviously naturally limited by the resources that they're given. And yeah, on the issue of cars, yeah, at the moment I get the data just as a bulk mileage that's done. I don't see what types of cars, and so all I do at the moment is apply an average vehicle, which is obviously quite blunt and doesn't pick up on the nuances and the increase of electric cars that will inevitably come. So I think perhaps in future that is something else to look at, see if we can look at it in finer grained detail to get I suppose, more accurate picture of what's happening.
Just a similar comment for our businesses as well. I mean, we know our businesses are big emitters of carbon. The support we can give them has tended to be smallish grants through the likes of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which you'll all be very familiar with. But in the great scheme of things, as Matt says, it's a drop in the ocean to what investment is needed.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Looking forward, the government has said we've got to start collecting this year, I believe, commercial food waste, and the following year, domestic food waste, which means that we're going to need more refuse vehicles. I believe it's 7, but I could be wrong. Are they going to be HBO powered? And also, where are we going to put them? And have we considered the carbon emissions of actually producing another depot? Because I understand the current depot isn't large enough.
I think that's one for me. Yeah, it is in the order of 7 new vehicles. There'll be 12-ton, probably, vehicles. They will be purchased to be compatible with HVO. I'd love to think that electric would be viable. It would be far too costly, and to be honest, they wouldn't have the range for what we need to use the vehicles for. And hydrogen is a way off yet, being a viable fuel, given the infrastructure that's required. So they will certainly be HVO ready. This council will need to take a view ultimately as to whether it wishes to fund HVO to go into the vehicles. That's a separate conversation. And yes, additional depot space will be required. We don't have enough depot space at the current time.
Okay, thank you. I'm a bit concerned that they'll be HBO ready, but they may not be HBO ready. That's you know, if we're trying to, we've decided and voted as a council for Destination Zero. I don't think there's an awful lot of choice. We have to have, I believe, some extra money sloshing around at the moment, so we should be able to fund them. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, vehicles aren't sold as just HVO vehicles, they're sold as diesel vehicles. But HVO can be put into the vast majority of diesel engines, and the manufacturers warranty them that way. So we'll ensure that the diesel vehicles we buy, we can put HVO in.
Councillor Palmer, did you want to ask? Yeah.
Do you have any way of capturing how much feed-in tariffs go? Because I've got a feed-in tariff on my thing, and you know, I feed it all back to electric, and they give me lots of money. Thank you. Do you have any way of capturing how much private households produce?
I don't. I must admit, it's not something I've looked at, so I won't categorically say we can't, but I don't know if we would get that from a district level data, but I'm certainly happy to have a look and see what we can find.
Because I think you will find it's quite considerable, actually.
Yeah, can I say I do that as well? And also I have an electric car and obviously can't and won't claim expenses related to any travel, so therefore I don't appear in any of the figures. So just adding to that. Councillor Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. If I can skip forward to the slide on generation. If my eyesight serves me, we've got hydro as a possibility on there, but actually nothing shown. As you know, we have private sites on the team using reverse Archimedes screw and straight water wheels. However, the team, as it comes through our district, has a record drop. I think it's an average of 1 metre per kilometre, which is why it is actually a post-industrial site all the way down with weirs at regular intervals. Is there any way that the district can actually influence hydro generation on the team? It's a putting back what was. It doesn't have to be scarring to the landscape with modern builds and suitable coverings for reinstating weirs, etc. But it's a renewable power source. Thank you.
I mean, obviously, it's certainly something we would be encouraging of. Our influence in making it happen is something that I can't answer specifically. I know a lot of the funding towards getting these sort of projects to fruition is focused on community organisations. So, for example, there's the Community Energy Fund that's sort of a national fund, but it's only accessible by communities who want to take forward local energy projects on a small scale. That's a good route through, but you need the community organisation to be interested in the first place. So how do we get those organisations interested is the question I don't have the answer to.
Come back on that. I looked at this a decade or two ago on the team, and one of the things that came up was that if you start supplying electricity from those hydro schemes to the local community, you could get whacked for business rates, which tended to make the scheme not viable. And again, you know, have we a possible hand in this as well if we want to encourage the use of this big renewable generator all the way through our area? Thank you.
Can I just respond? I was involved in a smallish hydroelectric scheme on Stroud Water in Stroud, unsurprisingly. And the challenge wasn't the business rates, the challenge was the private wire and the transmission losses along that, and also the Environment Agency has and the local Rivers Trust that had the flooding issues in constraining watercourses. So I think it'd be wrong to think that the business rates is the key thing here. I think there's a lot of policy challenges to getting it done. We had a single success, but that's because we had a private wire to an adjacent commercial receiver. And if you have that relationship, then it becomes a bit more possible.
Connection costs, as I understand it, to the grid as well can be a problem and
absolutely
costly.
Councillor Nielsen.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to raise a point in response or following on from Councillor Wilmot's point, because as Ian says, if you can find schemes which are viable without connection to the grid but via private wire, maybe, you know, PV, solar PV beside industrial parks or whatever, then they can be very profitable. You can be generating energy at around 60% of grid energy prices and selling it profitably. So, you know, that is, I suppose my question would be, is that an area we would consider looking at in Malvern Hills, because it could bring in your hydro, but it could also bring in other forms of energy generation locally and used locally as well.
Maybe it's a cheeky response. It's not one that's been identified as a priority within our 5-year plan, so maybe that's a conversation that needs to have.
Duly noted. Can I also say that obviously solar generation has its own connections, and we have a lot of those, and those can be placed along rivers, and therefore the wiring from solar could be used also for hydro generation. That's just off the top of my head. Sorry, yes. Right. Oh, Councillor Wells.
Thank you. Good evening. Broader question. So this morning I spent some time at Hackney Castle High School, one of our 5 schools, and funnily enough the conversation was entirely about sustainability. And they've drawn up a plan and they've consulted their parents and pupils, but that's the easy bit. And there's a huge dichotomy between the aspiration and the ability to deliver anything, even small practical measures. facilitating a car sharing scheme, for instance, perhaps getting a cycle bus in from Upton into the school. So since these schools and their parents and the travel, particularly the Hanley Castle pyramid, but that school in particular where over 60% are bussed in, which I suppose is good, but it'd be better if it was 90% bussed in, rather than the other 50% or 40% being cars rather than anything else. So I just wonder, Matt, in perhaps thinking about this moving forward, whether we might want to embrace our 5 high schools and see how what they're doing and any synergy that they may have with our aspirations. Even to deliver some small quick wins would be a nice thing to do, otherwise it just sits on the shelf somewhere. Second one is a more practical point about members and officers' travel. And as members will know, because I often come in drowned as a rat, having cycled here and engaged the hills to get here, I do so because for various reasons, not least the health benefit, both physical and mental, but also the carbon footprint that I may be reducing in so doing. But to be honest with you, there is no incentive for me to do that other than me doing what I believe to be the right thing in life. And when on occasion I do fill in my members' allowances and expenses forms, I find I get a paltry 12 pence or something for cycling, where I get a far better return for driving my wife's car, which on a night like this is deeply attractive. So I don't know whether perhaps in some point in the future, when we next review the independent remuneration panel reports, that we might feed into that process what they think they might be able to do to perhaps create parity between the motorist and the cyclist. Because when I go to Helford's to get my bike serviced and repaired, it's not a cheap solution, though I could have and should have taken advantage of the council's £50 scheme, which I missed the boat on that. So 2 practical points. One is, what can we, if anything, do to help the high schools in particular discharge their commitment to carbon neutrality? And secondly, what practical measures can we put in place to ensure that the likes of Councillor Wells don't feel as though on a night like tonight it's easier to jump in the car?
Yeah, well, I think the prospect of engaging with those schools is quite a good one. What we specifically can do, I think, remains to be seen, but it's certainly something I'd be happy to talk to them about, to see, because I'm really interested to see what they have included in their plan as well. The potentially a good example for others to encourage action amongst other organisations. And yeah, I'm aware sort of the issue with the bike allowances. Obviously, I can't provide an answer for that, but it's something to be looked at in future.
And you will be cycling home tonight.
Yes.
Yeah, we can feed that in, but of course, I don't know when the IRP process is probably happening around now, is it, or has it been concluded for this year? But we can certainly look to input into that at the relevant point, Councillor Wells.
And just to spare Matt's blushes, he will be cycling home back to Worcester tonight. So he does walk the walk as well.
Anyone? Councillor Michael.
Sorry if I can come back. So if I can come back again, something that Councillor Wild mentioned about the domestic situation. We've all heard these horror stories about the inefficiency of heat pumps, etc. Because I wonder how much of percentage of our housing stock, which is probably a lot of it's quite old, is actually compatible with heat pumps without spending a lot of money in upgrading them. And how are we going to achieve that? Because I know there's a great big pushback against heat pumps, and people just want to go and buy a new gas boiler.
Yeah, that's a huge issue. I think one issue is the understanding of heat pumps, and a fair bit of misinformation around it as well. But also, what has to happen to your home, not just the heat pump, to make it fit for purpose. And so that differs from household to household. But that's where, obviously, particularly financially, that can really start to hit and sort of tip people's decision about what they do for their next heating system. So I agree, it's a really challenging issue. Yeah, I mean, there is a grant available at the moment, which will give you sort of £5,000 towards a heat pump. I think that generally tends to work out to pay for the heat pump and installation. But then if you've got additional works on top of that, obviously then it starts to get more expensive.
Councillor Allen.
Yes, just thank you, Chair. Just to add to that, I think the Green Deal or Green Levy started in 2001, wasn't it? And it's a tax on our gas and electricity bills, and that's been ring fenced, hasn't it? So I believe there's a very big, huge fund that shortly the government are going to start releasing and making it easier for people to actually apply for things such as heat pumps, etc.
Yeah, I don't know specifically on that, but the levies at the moment it's applied to electricity, particularly which makes our electricity more expensive than gas, which is again part of the problem. Because if you're asking people to convert from gas to electric, it's becoming more expensive per unit because of the levies. So there will be a shift around in that as well at some point. But what they are going to do with the money generated from it, I don't know.
Can I just make a comment about social housing? If there is one area where heat pumps and new heating systems would be beneficial, it's to the people who live in social housing. Last year I actually had to give my own money to some people who couldn't even afford to heat their house when I was going around seeing them. And, you know, at the end of the day, that's where things could be done, because quite a lot of social housing needs updating anyway. And are we dealing with platform housing, for example, in relation to that? And how are they performing on this? This is something that I believe this committee eventually will want some more information on.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it'd be for the housing team to talk in detail about that, but I know we do have worked with those registered providers on funding programmes to do this very thing, but obviously that's for the housing team to talk about in future.
Fair enough. Is there anybody else who would like to speak? Okay, thank you very much for that. That was wonderful. Can we now go on to the presentation on community and public transport? And we have Emily Barker, Head of Planning and Transport from Worcestershire County Council here, with Mark Kelly, Principal Transport Planner, and Stuart Payton, Head of Transport Operations. Can I just say welcome to you all?
Thank you all, and thank you for the invite to come and speak to you tonight. So, as you probably know, I'm Emily Barker, Head of Planning and Transport Planning at County Council, and I'm joined here tonight by my colleague Mark Kelly, and just joining us, just coming into the room, is Stuart Payton, and then on the end we've got Douglas Lee, who's from the South Worcestershire Council's local plan team, just in case there are any questions that go over onto the local plan. So we've divided this into 3 parts. So Mark is going to start off by talking about active travel, so walking, cycling and wheeling. Then I'm going to do a little bit on transport policy and some of the policy documents that we've got, and rail. And then Stuart's going to talk to us about buses and that side of transport. So if I hand over to Mark.
Good evening all, Mark Kelly from County Council and the Transport Planner. So in terms of active travel, what I'm going to talk about tonight is the local cycling, walking and infrastructure plans. And these are basically key documents that we'll be using going forward to identify active travel improvements. The LCWIPs, as we call them, come back to the cycling and walking investment strategy from 2017, which set out requirements for local authorities to set out active travel plans. The overall aim is around 50% of local trips to be undertaken by foot or bicycle by 2030. I think a key thing to say about the LCWIPs in themselves is that they don't actually come with dedicated funding, but certainly having them in place allows the county council to bid for active travel funding, especially with Active Travel England, who are the key body in terms of active travel, and they take a keen interest in LCWIPs. Where we are at the moment, there's 8 LCWIPs currently in development, including Malvern. The most advanced at the moment are Evesham and Redditch. We've actually recently completed engagement for both those LCWIPs, and we hope to have those completed in the spring 2025. And in terms of South Worcestershire, including Malvern, Droitwich, Pershore and Worcester City, we're looking to engage in public engagement in later in the summer, certainly post-elections. In terms of the actual LCWIPs themselves, I think it's important to say they'll inform our refreshed local transport plan. Obviously our local transport plan currently includes active travel schemes, but the LCWIPs will help inform those the local transport plans coming forward, and ultimately they'll also inform local plans, and in terms of funding, not just Active Travel England, but of course with developers and so on. And this next slide really is just in terms of the process. So as I said, the DFT issued guidance back in 2017, and the aim of the guidance really in terms of the stage process is that our plans are sort of evidence-led and are quite robust. So we have, in terms of Malvern, for example, we've commissioned Jacobs to undertake the LCWIP, and they're currently developing those stages, certainly around stage 1, stage 2 and 3 and 4, and to come up with the key outputs. So there's, in terms of that slide, we've got three key outputs, but the main output ultimately is a final report, and that report will be the LCWIP report, in this case for Malvern, and it'll be hopefully be adopted and go onto our website, and as I said, then linked to local transport plans and other strategies. But within that report, we have the routes themselves. So the consultants are charged with identifying key routes, and also the next stage, once they identify those key routes, it's looking at the prioritisation programme. So they prioritise which routes have the best benefit. But certainly in terms of the network, we'll be engaging quite closely with key stakeholders in terms of developing those networks. And in terms of the interventions, excuse me, I've got a slide further on that. But we a key design standard that we have now for active travel improvements is local transport node 1 of 20, and that's really key around particularly for cycling provision, looking at segregation, physical segregation where possible, and if that's not possible, then looking what we can do in terms of the highway to promote cycling and make it safer on the highway, and that's around managing speed, managing volume and so on. And just another slide then, just on the update on the Malvern LCWIP itself. So as I said, Jacobs, our term consultant, are undertaking that currently. In terms of the guidance, the LCWIP themselves, the local authorities have to prioritise improvements for those areas that give the greatest potential for growing cycling and walking trips. And the reason that I say that is that in this initial LCWIPs, and certainly for other ones we've looked at, the initial focus is on the urban extents. So those areas that have the greatest potential. But I'm certainly conscious for Malvern Hills and for other areas that there's more than the urban areas. But certainly future LCWIPs would potentially consider outside the urban areas. And as it happens, Active Travel England, we believe, are developing more guidance in terms of those rural areas. Just in terms of the LCWIPs themselves, again, go back to the guidance. We look at in terms of proposals, we divide between cycling provision, and then separately for walking and wheeling. And when I say wheeling, we mean sort of wheelchairs and mobility scooters that obviously use existing footway. And I've already mentioned that in terms of Malvern LCWIP, we'll be looking to engage public engagement in the summer. This slide is just an example. It's not necessarily relevant to Malvern, but it's just an example. No, exactly. For the type of engagement that we've done previously on Wire Forest. So we completed the Wire Forest engagement, public engagement, the first stage of it back in 10th of Jan. It finished, but this is the type of output that will go on that goes on our website. And what you can see there in the primary colour, the green, is a primary route, and then greyed out our other linking routes. But that's just really as an example to give you an idea what outputs will be on the website. And then finally, just really to give you some idea of the type of interventions that are proposed. So the LCWIPs will include individual routes, a number of routes within individual areas, and then even within those routes, it'll be broken down into sections for improvements. So the type of interventions there. So we've got shared use paths. In this case, to delineate shared use paths. There's already quite a few of those, of course, in Malvern already, Townsend Way, and then there's also light segregated cycleway. So that's on the highway, and the intention of that is just to around the perception of safety. So where the local conditions mean you cannot have the shared use path, then that they may well light segregation is an option. Ideally, with light segregation, the volumes, there is a table within LTM 120 for designers to assess the type of interventions, and for certain number of volume and certain speeds, you may not have light segregation, but in most cases, certainly for 30 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour, you can have light segregation. Quiet ways is another example. There's sort of very little physical infrastructure is required for quiet ways, but it's a type of thing you might have near schools. Greenway, that's more really, for example, there's disused railways quite often have greenways. And then that parallel crossing, that's where you've got really quite high demand on a cycle route to separate cyclists from pedestrians crossing the highway, and then that Copenhagen crossing, or the side road treatments, that's where where you've got a cycle route that crosses a side road, and it's just to give more priority really for active travel at the junction. And that's all I have on the slide on the LCWIPs.
So I don't know if how members would whether you'd like to ask questions now on active travel, and then we'll pick up on other elements.
That's probably the best idea. Yeah. Who was first? Councillor Weil.
Thank you. I'm not as brave as Councillor Wells to get on my bike, but do try to walk as much as I can, but the number one disincentive is, of course, safety. And I'm just trying to get my head around how you're going to do this for Malvern Hills, because it's very different to a town. You know, our geography is very different around here. And the cost and the timescale, because from what I understand, the council is nearing bankruptcy, and this could be just pie in the sky, as desperate as we need it. So what are the timescales, and have you got a budget set aside for it? And the joined up pathways, it's no good just having Town's Own Way, because I can't do my shopping and get there, you know, on a bike, and then just do the last half mile. So yeah, if you could expand on that, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really a first stage in terms of setting out the plans, and the detail will follow in as the process develops. I think in terms of plans in the past, the local transport plans, there was really quite high level proposals. In terms of the LC whips will have more detail in terms of identifying a network, but then breaking it down into chunks, potentially deliverable chunks. And in terms of the time period, we are probably talking. I mean, the guidance talks about a program up to about 10 years, but certainly what we've looked at so far with Redditch, it's 10, 15 years, hence, but it's a starting off point from, you know, it's about starting off point and making sure active travel is thought about in so many scenarios, which it maybe isn't at the moment. And I know from my experience, just as an officer, it's having those plans in place when you're looking at other projects, for example, and things like maintenance. You can pass the details to the maintenance team, so there's no doubt that this is a potentially primary route. But I totally accept in terms of funding. It's going to be a challenge, but it's a start, hopefully.
Thank you. I'm really disappointed, but not surprised. We've been campaigning for this for at least 25 years in this area, so to say another 10 to 15 years is very disappointing. Not your fault, but...
Maybe I should clarify that in terms of what I said, 10, 15 years, that the programme will be over that period. In terms of providing the whole network, it's probably deliverable over that period, but with a huge caveat on funding.
Councillor Allen.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good evening, thank you for coming. Is LTP4 dead?
I think you must have read my slides already. So I have included a slide later on Local Transport Plan 4. And the answer is no, it's not dead. But we are starting the process of refreshing it. Now, in terms of active travel, Local Transport Plan 4 looked at the key corridors between settlements. So it looked at Worcester to Malvern, Bromsgrove to Redditch, etc. However, what the local cycling and walking infrastructure plans are doing is they are refining that down based on the government guidance of concentrating within the urban areas to focus on those short trips, because they're sort of where we can get the greatest bang for our buck, for want of a better way of putting it. However, the aspiration to deliver those connective cycle routes between the settlements still remains. Some of them are already, none of them have been fully delivered. Some of them have been, aspects of some of them have been delivered. And it's still something that we would collect, for example, developer contributions on as and where possible.
Right, thank you. So basically the LTP4 POIC one and the Kemsey one really are more aspirations now, I think, from what you're telling me, and you're looking more to urban environments to deliver at the moment.
So of the two longer distance routes in the county, those two have got some funding. We've got funding that we're for both of those, in part from Section 106. And around POTE, we're currently working with Active Travel England to look at some solutions which comply with the guidance in LTN, Local Transport Note 1 of 20, because that is, as you all know in this room, a very complex environment, and to deliver something that is compliant is very difficult. So that is something that we're still working on, and like I said, we have got some Section 106. We can't get all the way to Malvern with the money we've got, but we can deliver chunks as and when we've got some money.
Can we get all the way to Kemsey from Worcester?
We can get a proportion of the way with the funding that we will receive from South Worcester Urban Extension.
Okay. Any idea how far?
I'm not quite sure how far. I can get you a written.
Yeah.
I can get
2
you a
metres
follow-on.
or 2 miles.
It's quite a considerable way. I can get you a more detailed response.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Michael.
Yeah. Can you tell me, is one of your stakeholders Sustrans, and how do you interact with them?
Yes, yes, they are. As it happens, they are commissioned. Sustrans are commissioned to undertake some of the North Worcestershire LCWIPs. So they're commissioning. They've nearly completed Redditch, and they'll be working on Wire Forest and Bromsgrove. Separately to that, they are on there's a separate stakeholder group, the Active Travel Stakeholder Group, and Sustrans sit on that as well.
It's just that I'm glad to hear that all these different active travel organisations are sort of in lockstep and working together.
Councillor Harrison. Sorry, Councillor Wells first. No.
We're not here tonight to ask the easy questions, so forgive me if these seem rather confrontational. The first question I have is in relation to one of the slides you showed us a while ago where you spoke about long-term ambition, but then by the year 2030, which is 5 years away, it came and went quickly. Was it 50%? So we have a long-term ambition, but we're going to deliver 50% in 5 years. That seems a bit of a contradiction. I'm wondering whether I'd misunderstood the slide.
So yeah, the 50% ambition is from the government.
Right.
So they established that vision 3 years ago, and we're working towards that 50% of short trips, and they define short trips as sub 2 miles, 5 kilometres, should be by active means by 2030. So, and obviously the local cycling and walking infrastructure plans are part of that ambition to get us there. There's a number of other pieces of work that we're undertaking to get us there. And some of the interventions can sometimes be very small. Sometimes it's about putting a dropped curb in, that type of thing to help people, to putting in an additional crossing. Will we get there? We're not sure, but we are working towards it.
Thank you, Emily. If I may continue, Chairman. You then spoke about, on one of the slides, 5 stages to the process, I think, and you said that Jacobs, a private company, would be doing this work for us. But then you also spoke about consultation this summer in Malvern. I'm wondering at which stage of those 5 phases will you be consulting on?
The engagement, we are, in terms of the South Worcestershire ones, we'll be most likely looking at we'll be undertaking stakeholder engagement. So, for example, with officers, we can do that before the elections. But in terms of the in terms of engagement, that'll be during the summer.
My question was, which of the 5 stages were you to consult on?
The reason I'm slightly we're probably taking 2 different approaches. We've taken an approach with Sustrans, for example, for North Worcestershire, but certainly for South Worcestershire, we're actually doing 4 at the same time. So in terms of that engagement, for example, for North Worcestershire, we actually did the engagement on the emerging networks. So that was stages 3 and 4.
Forgive me for being, lots of people want to ask questions, and I just want to get to the point. Don't really care about what you did in Stourport, to be honest. I'm more concerned about what you're going to do in Malvern this year.
Yes.
So my question is, we have 5. Could you go back to the slide with the 5 stages so we can all see if I'm remembering this correctly? 6 stages. Goodness me. So which of those 6 stages, determining the scope, gathering information, network plan for cycling, will we be consulting our populace on in June or July? Have we got apples and pears going on here?
Okay, so we will be consulting on stages 3 and 4, which is the network plan for walking and the network plan for walking and wheeling and the network plan for cycling. There has been an initial sort of information gathering stage already, to which officers were invited back in, Mark will tell me.
Last autumn.
And it's the consultation will be so it will be consultation on that network plan. It will have some prioritisations in it, but one of the and it will be absolutely an opportunity for people to comment on the and yourselves as well to comment on the routes, the prioritisation, and whether you think that that's right, wrong, or we've got the right routes or the wrong routes.
Chairman, my final question then is in relation to funding. What sort of records have the County Council got in attracting government funding, or are we going to be reliant on Section 106 money to deliver these outcomes? And if that being the case, how are we going to manage expectation? Manage the expectation that you may be in the summer inadvertently party to, and then ultimately failing to deliver.
So in our consultations, we will be absolutely clear that and in the documents it will be clear that delivery is dependent on external funding. I've mentioned developer contributions already. That's only part of the picture. Active Travel England has funding. I think last time I came to this group, which was probably 18 months to 2 years ago, at that point we were rated level 0 by Active Travel England, and we talked about our aspirations. When we were level 0 we were unable to apply for funding. We're now level 1, so we can apply for funding. So we're in a better position there. We can also apply for funding from other government sources. For example, and I know it's not in this area, so please excuse me for using this as an example, but when we apply for major road network funding, for example the A38 in Bromsgrove, about 30% of the money on the major road network is actually being spent on active travel improvements. So it's a whole gambit of government funding that we will be using for this and other funding as appropriate.
Councillor Harrison.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Happy New Year to everybody. As Emily knows, I'm very keen on active travel and have been pestering her with emails for probably 5 years, if not longer. Interestingly, both Kemsey and POIC were submitted twice for funding, and unfortunately Worcester County Council had level 0, so got nothing. Now the interesting thing is that I'm not quite so bothered about the funding that they're going to get from the government, because it ain't going to be a lot, whatever it is. But why are the County Council not responding to planning applications that border active travel routes that are proposed, i.e. along the A38 between Worcester and Kemsey, and also between the Powick roundabout and Powick, and then between the Powick roundabout and Malvern. Now, I've asked many times why aren't you asking for funding, not even asking for footpaths to be put in, when in, I don't know, 5 or 10 years' time, somebody is going to have to pay for footpaths, whereas the developer should be paying. You know, it's quite straightforward. Now, the other interesting thing is that and I don't know whether Tom knows this, but there is a planning application that has been submitted for a solar farm at Bastonford. And the outflow from that will include recabling all the way from Bastonford to Spring Lane in Malvern, which means ripping up the footpath from Spring Lane to Malvern, from Bastonford to Spring Lane. Subsequently, why or can the developer be asked to reinstate the footpath as an active travel route? And likewise, there's other areas, as I said, between the roundabout at the Ketch going towards Kemsey. And there's other areas in Powick that, you know, have been dealt with as well.
So just on the solar farm, it's not a planning application I'm familiar with, so yeah, so apologies. So we will absolutely look at that. It is unlikely that we would be able to ask a developer to upgrade. So if it's just a footpath, we would be unlikely to be able to ask them to upgrade it, because their actual planning application will not generate footfall. Obviously it's housing, you got an increase in footfall, it's a different situation, but it's unlikely, I would say, from a solar farm. Certainly in terms of planning applications, as and where possible, we do ask for developer contributions. If there are some that we've missed where you think we should have done, then we're always happy to look at it again and learn from that process. But we do ask for developer contributions for active travel as much as we can.
Thank you very much.
Does anybody else want to ask any questions before the next stage? Councillor Victory first.
Thank you. If the plans were initiated in 2017, what have you been doing for 8 years?
So in 2017 we produced our local transport plan 4, and then since then in 2020 we started to refine them through the local cycling and walking infrastructure plans. And the reason we started working on them in 2020 was because that was when the government gave us a small pot of money to start working on a local cycling walking infrastructure plans.
So in other words, all activity towards active travel has been delayed because the money wasn't available from the government or other sources, and the county council was not going to fund it themselves. I don't really see that as entirely satisfactory. Thank you.
That isn't the case. We've got quite a lot of delivery that was also occurring during that time as well. It was just the focus on LC whips didn't start until slightly later in refining the proposals in Local Transport Plan 4.
Councillor Nielsen.
Thanks so much. I just wondered about the principles in LTN 120 and what exactly is required, because one of the sort of reasons that's put up for not having more LC whips or cycle routes, I suppose, ultimately on the ground, is that you know, the degree of segregation required, the distance between cars and the cycle paths. But you showed some quite sort of lower cost options, I think, on the side. So how flexible is LTN 120, and can we, you know, implement these? How many LC whips was it for Malvern Hills? Was it 7 or something, I think you said?
Was it, there's 8 LC whips across Worcestershire.
8. Oh, but across Malvern Hills, how many was it?
Well, one LC whip in itself,
just
but of course that will contain a large number of routes within that.
Okay. So can we, you know, make the money go further by just having much lower cost options?
Yeah, I think in terms of LTM 120, one of the key issues for is around speeds, and where you can get speeds down, then the cost can go down for there's less interventions required. And I think that's probably the key point is in terms of keeping costs down.
Right.
Because obviously, if you've got 40 miles an hour road, 30 miles an hour, and high volumes, then you need full segregation, and that's a very expensive thing.
Thank you.
Next stage.
Okay, thank you, councillors. So I'll move on to talk about the rail investment strategy and local transport plan 4, which has already had a mention, and how that will go forward into review. So rail investment strategy. Our rail investment strategy was originally adopted in 2017, and then we reviewed and refreshed it in 2023, I beg your pardon, post the pandemic. And that has a number of key matters in it. It reaffirms our commitment to increase the connectivity on the North Cotswold line. So Worcestershire is one of the 5 local authorities that's a member of the North Cotswold Line Task Force. So that's Gloucestershire, Oxfordshire, Warwickshire, Herefordshire, and then Great Western Railways, GWR, and Network Rail. And we're all working together to achieve 2 trains per hour in each direction on the North Cotswold line through selective dualling. And that is an ongoing commitment. We're working with partners to lobby government, because that's the sort of funding that can only come from government. We're continuing that work with government to achieve that. And then the other key commitment, which is will have an impact on Malvern, is the Midlands Rail Hub. Now the Midlands Rail Hub has got funding allocated by government, and the key aspect of it that will affect Malvern is the aspirations for 2 trains per hour from Birmingham, Worcester, Hereford via Bromsgrove. Now that is currently those trains can currently only run from Birmingham to Worcester because there's a dependency on the Worcester re-signalling. Those of you who travel by train or are familiar with the rail lines in Worcester will know that it's got the very old-fashioned semaphore signals that you see on heritage rail lines, which brings all sorts of issues, not just around reliability of the signalling system, but the number of trains that can operate in the area at any particular time. The re-signalling, which is changing basically from semaphore to modern colour signals, the actual delivery of that is unfunded at the moment. So we're working heavily with Midlands Connect, who are the regional transport body and the leads for working on the Midlands Rail Hub, to strengthen that business case for the extension, so that the second train goes over to Hereford through Malvern, and Network Rail on the investment case to change that signalling into the modern type signals. And it isn't just about changing the signals themselves, it is about reducing the spaces between the signal blocks so that you can actually run more trains through there. So that's an ongoing piece of work. Quite a lot of work is being done on that at the moment, because there is the government commitment to fund the Midlands Rail Hub, and we want those benefits to be across the whole of Worcestershire and obviously into Herefordshire. If I just go on to talk about policy framework, so Local Transport Plan 4, and then I'll pause again for questions. So this was adopted and it is coming up for its periodic review. But Local Transport Plan 4 and all local transport plans are umbrella documents, and they're fed into by all sorts of other transport documents. So they are fed into by the local cycling walking infrastructure plans, bus service improvement plans, which Stuart will mention in his presentation in a few minutes, rail investment strategies, and also by the local plans, so the planning local plans, because to some extent they are the transport expression of local plans and economic investment. So we're currently working on a number of our supporting documents. Government, the previous government I should say, was due to produce new guidance on the review of local transport plans. Unfortunately, that was heavily delayed by the last government, particularly around their expectations for carbon and calculating the carbon impact of both transport itself, aspirations for change, and any new schemes that were in local transport plans. We are now expecting this guidance to be produced in summer 2025, and to inform how the local transport plan itself moves forward. Just moving on, one of the other underlying documents from the local transport plan is the Streetscape Design Guide. Just mentioning that here because it sets out how we would expect streets that we would adopt. So this is coming through planning applications, how they will be designed and constructed, and that's currently open for consultation. It's been on a 12-week consultation. It's open until the 27th of January. Why are we undertaking a whole-scale review of the Streetscape Design Guide? Because government guidance has changed, guidance and policy has changed, and we want to provide greater clarity on pre-application advice, on the technical approval process for the 27838 process, reducing the submissions around that process, improving the communication and understanding with the developer, and timescale for the completions of street lighting approvals. It also provides greater clarity around manual for streets and design manual for roads and bridges, and making our requirements clearer, so that developers know from the get-go exactly what the expectations are if they want their roads to be adopted. And it's also informed by some updated guidance. We've talked about Local Transport Note 1 of 20, which is cycle infrastructure design, but also referring to net zero, climate change, and changes to the National Planning Policy Framework. So if I pause there for any questions.
Councillor Wilde.
Thank you for your presentation. One of the biggest problems with our local railway network is delays and cancellations and unreliability. And I don't say that just for myself. As I'm sure most councillors, watch the local Facebook notice boards and see what people are grumbling about. And this just comes up over and over again. Plus the stories of the impact of a child who's waiting perhaps to go into Worcester for the grammar school, or, you know, etc., etc. It's the knock-on effects of these regular cancellations. We don't seem to be addressing that issue, and I think the public would be really happy just to know that their train's going to turn up regularly.
I think you're absolutely correct. That's what passengers want. In many ways, they're not very bothered about who runs the train. They just want the train to be there at the time that it's supposed to be there and to go where it's supposed to be going. Obviously, it is a responsibility of West Midlands Trains to run their service. The County Council has got one of our councillors as a director, and that's our cabinet member our cabinet member for highways is on the board of West Midlands Rail Executive, and it is something that he absolutely raises regularly. West Midlands Rail Executive do put a lot of pressure on West Midlands Trains concerning the poor state of their poor performance. I don't think there's any hiding behind that. There is poor performance, and their director does get called to account regularly on it. Having said that, yes, there is still absolutely an outstanding issue, and that is something that we will continue to pressurise in the way that we can on that.
Thank you. Can you just relay to the director that we're not happy either?
I will happily do so.
Can I second that? Anybody else? Before we go on to the next... Oh, Councillor Nielsen.
Yeah, thanks very much, Emily. Just looking at the numbers that I have got available, but there may well be more up-to-date ones, which are in one of the LEPS documents in terms of economic performance for Worcestershire. But it is showing that for 21-22, rail use has not recovered, obviously, since pre-COVID levels, but quite considerably for Great Malvern in that year. It was it had been about 500,000 pre-COVID. It went to 250,000, I'm guessing here a bit. Same for the Link, and Worcestershire Parkway is obviously a new station, so the comparisons aren't there. But and Foregate Street and Shrub Hill, Foregate Street is sort of over 1 million, 1.7 million, I think, looking at this. So, but it had been over 2 million prior to that. So I just wondered, how are we investing in really getting people back onto rail, given the environmental benefits, and making sure that it's accessible as possible? Connectivity to those stations is, being considered as part of the LC WIPs. I mean, Worcestershire Parkway is difficult to cycle to. There are no cycle routes to it, and dangerous roads if you're trying to get there on a bike. So just sort of wondered what your thoughts are on those numbers and getting people onto the railway again.
So if I just deal with the numbers first. So numbers have increased since then, but it's the patterns of movement that have changed in terms of people's use of rail. So in terms of pure commuting, it's still only about 85, 86% of pre-COVID. Mm-hmm. And it does vary, obviously, on days per week. Focus, of commuting is Tuesday, Wednesdays, Thursdays. Yeah. Friday, in terms of a commuting day, was already lower pre-COVID than the other days of the week, but obviously that has been pattern has been reinforced. Leisure travel, it depends on the day of the week. So, for example, Friday, Saturday, Sunday and Monday are very heavily leisure. There's a lot of leisure use now. In some cases, that's over 100% of pre-COVID, and it does depend on the route. But routes that are going down to, for example, the southwest are well over 100% of pre-COVID. And that is driving some changing behaviours within the rail industry as well, who, as you'll know, previously did most of their serious maintenance at the weekends. There have been a couple of major contracts where they've done that off the weekends because there are other quieter days. Business travel, that's sort of where that's classified as when people sort of go to Manchester, Bristol for a day, 2 days for meetings. That is still rising. That went very low and that is still rising again. So we are seeing sort of some erratic patterns still. In terms of promoting rail travel, that's something we do in a number of different ways. obviously there's Parkway Station, which is a major new asset on the network, and we are looking at what additional services can call there and what additional services are needed elsewhere in the county. There is now the first time a link to Scotland directly from Parkway. It's only one train a day, but it is a link to Scotland, and we hope to build on that. And we're doing a lot of work with cross-country trains on how we build on that. And the other thing that we're looking at across the whole of the county is how accessible our stations are, just in terms of how people get there. So we are looking at them in terms of the local cycling walking infrastructure plans. We do look at them in terms of bus connectivity, and we do look at them in terms of, you know, for example, Worcestershire Parkway, it's got a big car park, you know, enabling people to access that, to park their car, who would previously have done their whole journey by car. So we are looking at that.
I just wanted to add something. Basically, a lot of people come to Malvern to ride bikes, and the trains don't have enough space for bikes. And, you know, maybe there should be a bike train at some point of the day that you could then advertise that there was more space to bring your mountain bike on or whatever. Because let's face it, cars can't handle bikes either. It's just a point.
Thank you.
Part 3.
Hi everyone, my name's Stuart Payton. I am the Head of Transport Operations for Worcestershire County Council. I know some of you know me, some of you don't. I put this slide up because it gives a bit of context of the sort of progression of sort of where we were to where we are now. So in 2019, Worcestershire County Council decided to launch a passenger transport strategy. That was to look at what we thought would help the network work better and sort of the ideals. One thing we didn't have for that was any funding back in 2019. Obviously, then a lot happened in terms of the COVID, and you know, we found ourselves in a different place. But the government launched Bus Back Better in 2021, and with that came the responsibility for county councils to have what they call a bus service improvement plan. So we launched our sort of first version of BSIP. I'll call it BSIP because it's quite a mouthful if you keep reading it out. Back in 2021. So the aims of the BSIP, and I'll go into a bit more detail about those, is to, you know, what it says on the tin is to improve bus services. Now, there was a sort of competitive bidding process with the sort of funding, which we weren't successful, unfortunately, like a lot of shire authorities at that point. But since then, the government announced that, you know, they wanted to come back. So there was further funding, and I'll go into a bit about the funding shortly. But we had to relaunch the bus service improvement plan. One of the big tenets of a bus service improvement plan is to form an enhanced partnership. Now, what's the idea of that is that you don't do the county council don't do it in isolation. We have to do everything with bus operators. There is a board and a formal process which we've had to set up with operators, so that, you know, everybody agrees that we're spending the money in the right places that will improve the network and give you know, better outcomes for passengers, but it'll also increase the amount of people who actually use buses, which is a key element for us. It's a key element for operators. So it's a sort of way. Now, we have to do this, otherwise we don't get the funding. So there's also that caveat, is it has to be done in this way. So we've had to relaunch our new BSIP. That draft version went to the DFT in June. Obviously, there was a change of government and various things, so it's kind of still moving along, and hopefully we've nearly finalised it, and that will be published very shortly. So the basic tenets of the improvement plan are what we call network prioritisation. So that's focusing on improving services, so more frequent services that run at weekends, services that run later into the evening, earlier in the morning, and those sorts of sort of issues. So we're looking at those. Enhanced bus priority measures, so improving the way buses can move around, with that's intelligent signalling and things like those. Improving the image of public transport. So looking at it as a network safe, secure and cohesive system, because obviously at the moment that's kind of something that's keen for us. Like we're looking at branding, we're looking at sort of clear information, consistent messaging, so consistent branding, so put all timetables look the same, are easy to read, and that's not just in Malvern Hills but across the whole of the network, because you have many different operators putting out many bits of information. So we're trying to make sure that, you know, as part of that we have a collective response. So actually, what information's out there, how do we get it out there, and it all looks the same, easy to read, easy to find, etc. So we're looking at passenger charter as part of this as well. So, you know, making bus operators, you know, sign up to agree a set of rules. So, you know, cleaner buses, drivers who can dementia friendly. You know, there's a whole lot of things that sort of go in that. But we're still very early stages of this, which I will point out. Alternate service provision. So that's things like the DRT, which obviously Malvern Hills has got a current DRT scheme, and also looking at what more community transport can do along those. We want to make sure that, you know, one of the key aspects for us is not just improving the frequency and sort of those core routes, but how do we get to places that haven't had buses for a long time? How do we see more of the rural community? We've had, you know, bus services in rural areas have been on the decline long before COVID, etc. In terms of, you know, where they are. You know, there's very many reasons for that, but we obviously fund a lot of subsidised bus services in rural areas, but they're very, you know, we have specific routes. They're not always the best solution for people, because they might be, you know, on a Wednesday and a Thursday or a Friday, and they might not run all week, and they run at, you know, times. But things like the DRT give people far more flexibility and actually where they can go and what time they want to go and stuff like that. So you know, I think it's a real key part of what we're looking at for those rural areas of Worcestershire. Bus infrastructure improvements. There are just under 3,000 odd bus stops sort of in the county as it stands now. A lot of those have shelters, but we own about 11% of any sort of bus stop infrastructure as a county council. It's just under 3,000, about 2,800 and something like that. But we own 11%, as in the county council is responsible for 11% of that. So you can understand there's quite a lot out there that it's owned by district councils, town councils, parish councils, long forgotten parts of the, you know, so there's a lot of stuff out there that's not really fit for purpose. It's not being looked after, maintained. Is it still required, etc. So there's a big piece of work we're trying to do on bus infrastructure improvements. Try and get a uniform so people understand, oh, that's a bus stop, and what information is at that point. So how can they access information at the bus? So look, things like increasing the amount of real-time information displays that we have out. Looking at things where you have QR codes at the bus stop, so people can actually access. We don't have to put the real time in the shelter, but if you've got a smartphone, you can access the real time. And then how do we get information to people who don't have, you know, that sort of access, and how do we get that information? So better bus stop timetables actually at the, you know, on the shelters and stuff like that, because we update some, the operators update some, and it you know, there's a disparity in how much, you know, some of those haven't been updated and how often it's done, etc. So there's quite a bit of work to sort of do that, but it's one of the key things that we think is important as part of this. Modal integration, obviously we talked briefly about getting to train stations and parkway and things like that. So, you know, that's a key for us, is how do we improve that onward journey? So how do you get onto the rail network, you know, improving bus services to train stations, etc. So obviously our DRT serves the you know, the train stations in Malvern as well as Parkway, so it gives those links. Okay. Technology and information. So looking at new technology as part of this. So, you know, we use a lot of sort of route optimization software. We're looking at how do you access, you know, information quicker on your phone, and you can put real time on your phone, so you can actually, you know, people see the bus service. One of the key things we get, and it's not just from the general public, from its bus operators, we have a lot of roadworks within Worcestershire. There's been a lot of, you know, work around gas services and various things like that, and it's that disruption messaging, because one of the key things is for bus services reliability. People stop using buses if they are not reliable, and there's quite a lot of studies around, you know, sort of that moving forward. and we get a lot of disruption through roadworks. So how can people get that message? How do we get that message to the bus users? The bus companies, struggle with it. So how do we, so there's a lot of, can we do that through, for the DRT, you've got an app, so we can tell you it's very quick and easy, but there's a better ways to do that and look for that. So there's a lot of sort of work around that. Fares and ticketing. So looking at lower and simple fare structures. Obviously, the government's had the £2 fare that's just gone up to £3. So we are looking at, are there anything that we can do outside of that or part of that to sort of incentivise bus travel. Implementing integrated ticket options. So we do have a connector ticket which you can use it, by this, but it's not well used, it's not well publicised. So we're looking at how we refresh that and looking at those. And then there is some work going on with the DFT around what they call, across a mode. So basically, you buy a ticket on the bus, but it lets you go on the train and move forward. So there's a project called Coral, which is underway at the moment. So sort of feeding into that. So there's a lot of work to be done. And for once, and I'll come to my next slide, we've actually got some money to do it. Whilst the rest of the county council struggles with money, we are unfortunately in a reasonable position of sitting fairly pretty in terms of the money we've had. So for a long time we've had sort of deficit funding in bus services, and we've sort of just looked after our subsidising, but we've been given money as part of we didn't get any money for phase 1. Phase 2 we got 2.8 million, so that was allowing us to maintain existing services. One of the things we've obviously since COVID is bus patronage take quite a dive after COVID, and it's slowly coming back. Fare paying patronage is actually not far off, or in some places slightly exceeding where it was pre-COVID. But concessionary travel is still down at around 70% of where it was pre-COVID. So that's kind of taken a hit, and obviously Worcestershire was heavily reliant on concessionary travel users. Actually, they made up more users of bus services previously in Worcestershire than fare paying passengers. So obviously that's taken up quite a bit of money out of the commercial network. We have been supporting that up to this point, but obviously there's ongoing issues with that. So we're still looking at supporting those operators and making sure that we look forward for sustainability and try and get people back. So we've also used that money to develop DRT services at Bromsgrove and Malvern. So you've obviously some of you may be aware, some are not, that obviously we're running demand responsive transport, and I'll just give you a sort of demand responsive transport is where you actually physically book the service you want through an app, and it covers an area. So there's a bit on demand responsive transport next, but I'll go into that. And developers in innovative software to aid with planning and network view. So we've got some new software packages that can take a lot of information, sort of census data and stuff like that, and we can look at how that maps with our existing bus network and is it fit for purpose. What you find with with shire authorities, and not just us, is a lot of our routes have been there for many years. They do serve an existing, but things move, things change, and it's trying to tap into that and understand if we're doing things best, and and how we do that. So phase 3, we've got another 3.4 million. So that's what we're using at the moment to develop the core principles of our sort of BSIP. So that's around the publicity, around improving this network as it stands, rolling out additional DLT services. So we've got plans to roll out further services in Wychhaven and Wild Forest next. But we have got a county map, so we are bearing on funding moving forwards, looking at how we roll that out across the the rural areas of the county, because it has been a great success. It's we're continuing to see growth in it. Good to see, we are seeing very good passenger usage, and we see and it's one of the things that's very good about DLT, because you use an app, you can get feedback on the service itself. So out of 5 stars, we regularly hit 4.5 stars in terms of the service. So it for rural areas, we really think it has just enormous benefit in terms of that flexibility, in terms of the choice, in terms of all those things that previously they haven't had. We can cover much greater sort of swathes of the county with that than you would existing fixed routes bus services. Okay. So deliver frequency improvements, and we've just started those. So there's a bunch which I'll go into, which started start of this year. And we've just had an announcement for 25-26 that we're actually getting 9.3 million from government. So that's excellent. Now that actually comes with some capital as well. One of the things we've been sort of saying to the DFT, we do need some capital if we want to improve bus shelters and information, etc. So there's just short of 5 million worth of capital. The rest is sort of revenue funded. So, like I said, for once, we've actually got some money to sort of spend on bus services. Right. So I talked briefly about DLT, probably said a bit. So DLT, Worcester on Demand is one of the key things that we've been funding using the existing money. Alternative transport option to fixed route public services. So like I said, it covers a wide rural area, as you can see from the sort of map. You can cover a quite large geographical area. Probably needs to zoom in a bit, but what that allows us to do is to give people that flexibility. So if you're in the zone, you can travel to anywhere sort of within the zone, and you can choose the time you want to travel. So one of the things with fixed route services, they're very, it says it all in the name, they're fixed. It will go to Upton, Malvern on every other Tuesday or things like that. But this gives you the choice, actually. If your surgery is not on that, if your place of work isn't there, if you're where you go for leisure, etc., where you do shopping, etc., all of that now can be pre-booked. So you can pre-book it, the times and dates you want within the zone, and we've got points of interest outside the zone. So it goes to Parkway, it goes to Croom Court, it goes to Tewkesbury, Ledbury's coming soon, sort of thing. So people can make those journeys, but they can make those journeys when they want to, in a more flexible nature than they ever could with economic public transport. So it allows us, it really does allow us to give a lot more flexibility to rural areas and to serve villages and hamlets and things like that haven't had bus services for many years. So we've started pushing that out and promotion of that. Like I said, it's expanding both in Malvern and in the Bromsgrove zone because the take up and the sort of downloading the app has been excellent. There is a telephone number as well, so we're not excluding everybody just because they haven't got a mobile phone. So that's one of the key sort of elements. So the other one, the next one is bus service announcements. I'm not sure if you can read it particularly well. So this is the first tranche. There are a lot more to come. So we're looking at these are existing commercial services where we've supplied funding to increase their frequency, either to increase from hourly to half hourly or to run later. Now for Malvern, obviously the X44 now we've got an hourly weekend service, so on a Sunday, and we've put in additional later journeys. One of the things we've got a lot of feedback is it doesn't run late enough, the 44, so now that runs later, both on the week and the weekends. And obviously, it's now got a Sunday service, which is one of the things that came back as well. So that's, like I said, that's the first tranche. We're meeting with operators all around the county to look at not just the commercial network, but what we do is our subsidised network. So Malvern has a bunch of the 42 and some other subsidised services that serve it at the moment. So we're working with the operators to look at those and to come up with some potential plans as to how we can improve those. So, like I said, we've got money to do it, so now we're just working through the process of how we do that. But it has to be done in partnership with the operators. And we're now looking at how we also include wider stakeholders, so how we do that wider engagement as well, because that's one key thing we've got to do. And it's something we want to do to understand, actually, whilst we have an opinion, operators have an opinion, but it's understanding what the wider sort of opinions on where bus services should go, what feedback we can get. Bus service operators get a lot of feedback from drivers. People talk to the driver and say, I wish it went, so we're trying to get that, but we're trying to do this in a more formal way so that we can understand it and sort of make those decisions in a more, I say, for want of a better word, clever way to understand what we can do and what we can't. So that work, like I said, is underway at the moment. And that's kind of where we are with the bus service improvement plan. It's, like I said, I think the key takeaways is obviously that we have got money to improve bus services. We've got the desire to improve bus services. Our operators are on board with us in terms of where everybody wants to go. So now we're very much at the sort of start of the process. There is potential for further funding, which we will find out hopefully in spring from the Department for Transport. So we'll wait and see what they come out with. But at the moment, it's looking relatively positive about what we can and can't do. So yeah, any questions? Please fire away.
Councillor Wilde.
Mindful, it's me again. I just want to thank you for the on-demand service. especially as a grandparent who gets the phone call, "Can you collect me?" But what it's meant is, say, in the Hanley, Welland, Castlemorton, Wells area, the children go over to Kemsey, and so they have friends all over, and they've all been able to travel independently, which has been great. It took a while for it to take off, but I think that's brilliant for them. So thank you for that service. The very first slide, I noticed that your bus was an eco-electric bus.
Don't say that.
So going back to what we were talking about before and being very aware of just how dirty buses actually are, they kick out a lot of emissions. What are the plans for converting that over and including actually the school buses, because they're often quite old tatty buses, and you know we won't be joining up our policies if you know we're not practicing what we preach, basically.
It is in the bus service improvement plan that we will look at lower emissions and stuff like that. The issue we've got at the moment is this is the first time we've actually had any capital funding. Obviously, capital funding is required if we're going to work with operators to electrify and buy electric vehicles. It is something we've fed back to the Department for Transport, so we are hoping that they will, because they did have some. We put in a low emissions bid back in, I want to say 2023, I think, which we were unsuccessful, and that was for the Redditch sort of area. It had to be a sort of larger population town at the time. But we have said, that we're still keen to explore that, and we're keen to explore that with operators. And I know the operators are actually keen because actually electric, if you look at the actual running costs, it is cheaper than diesel buses. It's obviously the capital investment is the key, and that's not just in terms of the vehicles. Unfortunately, electric buses still cost about 3 times the cost of a diesel bus. And it's obviously then putting in the infrastructure and stuff like that. So whilst we've had the first tranche of capital, it's not close enough to sort of get to that point, but it is something that is in the BSIP. It's in there that we want to do. It was just very much dependent on whether we can get the funding to do that in a meaningful manner. But yeah, so one of the things we are looking at working with operators is to look at getting to all vehicles towards Euro 6 and things like so improving the actual buses that are currently on there. There are ways to do that, so I'm keen to work with operators to try and improve their fleets, etc. So, but it all comes down, like I said, to the capital fund.
Councillor Wilmot.
Thanks ever so much for your presentation. They're very interesting, illustrate the complexity of what you're looking at. If I can be impolite, Worcester County Council has just announced recently that it can't balance its books. Against that background, we have a central government that I think is going to have problems funding various things. We've been talking about futures here. How likely is it that your stuff, your programmes are going to be effectively ring-fenced by certain types of funding and may be impacted where it's not ring-fenced? Thank you.
Luckily, this is ring-fenced. So this and the requirement for the council to maintain its levels of funding from bus services is part of this. So if we don't maintain our levels of bus services, we lose the additional funding. So at the moment we are ring-fenced. This, in theory, is supposed to be a long-term plan from the government up till another 5 years plus, which was born out of the HS2 monies. Now we're still waiting, obviously, with caveat that we're still waiting for an announcement in spring about what their plans for the next 3-4 years are in terms of the funding. Now, what comes out of the DFT is yes, there will be money, but like I said, until we've actually physically seen it, and got that sort of commitment, I think there is still that caveat that it could disappear, I suppose, given the challenges that there are. But one of the things we've tried to do, and we're trying to do with it, is trying to build in sustainability in a lot of the things we do. So rather than just go, oh, we've got lots of money, we'll stick buses left, right, and centre, is actually what would we do if the money wasn't there? So how would these continue? So we look at the DRT, we were actually integrating some school services into that DRT. So that actually, we've got statutory duty, we spend the money on school service. Why not see if we can, cross sort of those. So we're doing a lot of work on those. We're doing more work on how we can get more Section 106 from developers, particularly around funding things like DRT, where there's smaller developments where we traditionally can't get money for large bus services or fixed bus services, but we could potentially get money for DRT. So we're looking at the ways we can do that. With the infrastructure, there's potential for advertising on bus shelters and stuff like that. That funding then can be ring-fenced to clean and maintain them and things like that. So there are things we have got in mind that actually what we want to do, and with the operators, where it improves services. So actually, do we the fair income actually then starts to improve efficiencies and stuff like that. So it's not easy, and it's not overnight fixes and stuff like that. But we have got one mind on that. What we do now, we want to be sustainable post any sort of funding drop off. But obviously, the funding will get us that kickstart. But it's having that future eye and saying, actually, do you know what? Because we don't want to put all this on and then all of a sudden take it all away again, because it's just not where we want to be, and I'm sure it's not what we want to do for the public. So we've got one eye on the future, but hopefully at the moment, the news coming out of the DFT is relatively positive, but obviously, we'll have to wait and see.
Councillor Nielsen.
Yeah, thanks very much. Also, I agree. Very interesting presentation. Again, I'm just looking at some stats here in the LEP economy programme for 23, and it suggests that bus usage obviously has not recovered in Worcestershire. It compares bus usage as a percentage in Worcestershire against a lot of other shire counties. Gloucestershire, for example, 27%, dropped to 10%. Worcestershire, 15.6%, dropped to 4.6% 2021. And Worcestershire is the lowest of all the shire counties on the chart that they present. Just wondered, why is Worcestershire so low in bus usage? Question number one. Question number two, unlike my colleagues, I'm not quite so familiar with the map of where that DRT service is actually going in Great Malvern, in the Malvern Hills zone. It misses Malvern because of the commercial routes. It misses Worcester because of the commercial routes. So, it feels my division as a county councillor falls just on the edge, I understand, of the Malvern Hills zone. Obviously, my residents would like to go to Malvern, and yes, there are some buses, but maybe now more from what you're saying. But I do know, for example, I live in the Lysinton area, that there isn't a bus from Lysinton to Malvern. So how do we actually get people where they actually want to go, to main centres? So two things: why are we so poor at buses as per head of population, and can we actually do stuff with DRT to get people where vast numbers of people want to go? To colleges, to centres of urban centres, basically. Thanks.
I suppose in terms of why is we so poor at bus services, I suppose there's been many years of where operators have, particularly first, had a sort of tranche of heavy reductions in bus services in Worcestershire. We were heavily hit in terms of the reduction in services, etc. Maybe not as I can't say if that was the same in certain other counties, but we have, like I said, after the every county after the pandemic, there were serious drop-offs in that. Like I said, in terms of fare payers, actually, it's slightly better than we were pre-pandemic. However, concessionary years, but that's a national picture, is hovering about 70%. I think what we're trying to do now is address some of those issues that certainly stop people using bus services even before that. And I think a lot of that is access to bus services. So things like the DRT and stuff like that. What we saw pre pandemic, was heavily cuts in rural area, those sorts of things, and even in urban areas. I think it's only really Worcester and sort of Redditch who maintained commercially profitable, if you like, bus services. So I think there's a lot of work to do that. There's a lot of work to do in terms of getting people back on buses. They've not had a great rep over the years. There's a lot of stigma around using bus services, so it's trying to work with operators to get that. And I think some of that is improving the infrastructure. Some of that is making sure they're more reliable. Sort of those services. So that's our key, is to really try and, because it's a joint goal between us and the commercial operators, is to try and increase the amount of people who use bus service. For them, it's what they need to do to save their businesses or continue. And for us, it's about making people use a more sustainable method so we can get more cars off the road, or and give people more access to services, etc. So I think that's key. In terms of that, getting to people where they want to go, I think it's often referred as the hub and spoke model, but the key is that a DRT then feeds into things like rail services, but it feeds into the wider bus network. So one of the things we're looking at is how does it feed into the wider bus network. So if you say, obviously the zone, if they want to go to Worcester or something, well, we don't want to step on commercial toes because obviously there's, operators going on. But we feed into that commercial network, so we actually drive more people into it. So do we, how do we, once we look at increasing the frequency, so we're currently increasing the X50 and obviously the 44 and stuff like that, so it becomes more regular services. So what we find, what's been done elsewhere is that you meet the bus basically, and how do we, the only way to guarantee you're not on a sort of hanging around for ages is you make that core route quick, you make it more frequent, you put more buses into it. So those are the key things we're looking at now, so that actually you can then use the DRT to get to a bus. I would say it's a bus stop, but we've slightly jazzed it up in terms of you put better shelters on it, you put more information on it, real-time information, so people can make that change quicker and then go on to those wider journeys. And also integrated ticketing is one of the things. So you only buy one ticket and it goes all the way through, so you don't have to buy a ticket when you get off and stuff like that. Not saying that's going to be overnight, and there's quite a bit of challenges with that in of itself, but those are the kind of where we're looking at and where we want to go.
Thanks, Paul. Just sort of a lot of towns are looking at mobility hubs, and you're talking about integrating the DRT into buses and so forth. But if you arrive into, say, Great Malvern on the train, there isn't just the opportunity to get up to Malvern shopping centre without if you want to do it quickly, probably walking, but it's up a hill and not that. So are we looking at the last half a mile or mile bit of connectivity, and how are we going to have some of these mobility hubs that a lot of other places are looking at or using?
We are looking at that. We're looking at mobility hubs, and we're looking at improving. There's been a big piece of work with the DFT about integration to rail and stuff like that. So we've a connectivity audit. So we've just sort of done that. So that's actually quite useful in terms of where we are, in terms of how do we improve that. So yes, so looking at bus services, access and transit, all those sorts of things are on this. In terms of the enhancements we're looking at. So, like I said, it is at the moment very early days in terms of where we're going with those enhancements, but there's a lot in there. But yes, that is on the agenda.
Can I just add to that, because Councillor Newsom brought up a very relevant point here. There's 1,000 feet difference in height between sea level and where people live in Malvern, and Great Malvern, right at the top, is really difficult to get to as a cyclist or a walker. And to hear that there might be a no-go zone for DRT because of a commercial operations situation that's absolutely scandalous.
Because this is what it feels like. It feels like DRT takes you where it's quite nice if you've got friends in Welland and all the rest, Castle Morton, but actually where you want to go. It's not taking you where you want to go. And it's fine if you've got a lot of time and you can wait for a bus and pick up the bus that's coming along. But you've got on a bus, which is quite a challenge, because this 2021 is saying 4.5% of passengers per head of population, people per head of population travelled on a bus in Worcestershire. And, we're saying this is our best chance of getting people out of cars, given the lack of funding for bikes and active mobility and all that, So how are we going to actually, get people up that hill for a start, given that we've got a load of people coming into Great Malvern? High street regeneration is a major economic goal. The traders talk about having tuk-tuks, or, you see places that have got, the trains, the little putty trow sort of thing, what's our solution in places like Link, Great Malvern in particular, because of the geographic issue and so forth?
Well, that's one of the things we're looking at as part, because obviously we fund, I think it's 42 at the moment, sort of things. So how do we improve those sort of services? Where one of the things with DRT is the idea is that it says more sort of rural areas, but we are looking at whether it can serve urban areas as well. It does in Bromsgrove, so whether that's something that so all of those things at the moment are considerations. We're not saying we've solved the problem exactly, but yes, they are on our radar in terms of how do we improve that. So it does do expand into, you know, DRT into sort of more urban areas. We're not saying we have to be very careful about stepping on commercial toes. There is some legislation around what we can and can't do around that, but we want to work with those operators to actually say, you know, can DRT benefit your wider network? And I think that's key where we want to go. It's about how do we feed people into the wider network. So, you know, the idea is that people can make those choices to where they go, on we go, and they can get there easily by public transport, not just easily but reliably. And I think that's the key. You know, there are challenges like that. So there are, you know, Malvern, because it's got its own challenges in terms of the height, you know, the levels and stuff like that. But like I said, we are really at the infancy of this process. There's still a lot of work we've got to do to gather this sort of information, to talk to people, to, you know, sort of stakeholders, and understand those sort of issues and problems in more depth and detail to come up with those sorts of solutions. So like I said, the DRTs are pilots at the moment. They've been very successful, but we are looking at expanding, and we will continue to look at them. Are they working? Are they, you know, doing the right things? Yes, obviously they're working in your area and very well in others. But yeah. But we are looking at expanding those wider and how we get more out of that. But then how do we link it into more conventional services where the demand is such high that DRT doesn't work? Because one thing DRT doesn't really cope with is when you're transporting 20 or 30 people a bus. So, you know, so it's how do we find the balance? I think that's the key. So we give people those choices and stuff. So yeah.
Can I just quickly add? Social media community groups are a good way of advertising buses. And I think we would all recommend that, because we don't see anything on our social media groups. I'm on about 15 of them in my ward, and I haven't seen any advertising at all. But the other thing is, for example, just the circular route around Malvern, Barnard Greens up to Great Malvern, down Malvern Link to the retail park would be a no-brainer. Councillor Harrison was next, if possible.
Thank you very much. I haven't got a lot to say, fortunately. I'd like to thank all the three speakers that we've had, and yourself for chairing this, and also to Doug for coming along, although we haven't heard from him. Are we going to get the slides? Because particularly the bus slides, it was impossible to read the Excel files that were on there.
Councillor Michael.
Yeah. This is not meant to be a flippant remark or anything, but one thing you'll find at railway stations, short journeys, are taxis. Is there any scope for subsidised fares with taxi firms, etc., that would cover that short distance of mile to different areas?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. That's something we haven't, you know, it's not something that's sort of within the bus service improvement plan. One of the things is key is that it has to be spent on, you know, registered bus services, things like that, which taxis aren't. Obviously, DRT sort of it's not quite a taxi service, but it's kind of where we are. So we'd have to look into that, and obviously what we're keen is that obviously we don't impinge on other, you know, on the taxi firms. You know. Yeah, exactly. So whether that subsidised fare is an interesting question. Yeah.
Sorry, Councillor Gallagher.
Yeah. Wonder what sort of planning you do for getting people to work. There are areas where people, like Spring Lane and so on, that there's a lot of people working there, and if you provide a service that gets people to there and away from there in the evening on a really that can be reliable on a regular basis, then you will get, I would imagine you will get people then actually transferring from their cars into a bus service that is probably cheaper than running a car back and forth each day for them. How much planning or how much information are you gathering about the need for that, and is anything actually happening on that front?
One of the things we're doing is working with employment. Now, we haven't done it in sort of Malvern Hills, and it is one of the key things of how does the enhanced partnership, because also we will have stakeholder groups that, you know, have employment sort of things, is we've just done some work in Droitwich looking at where they've got some industrial estates where it doesn't meet shift time. So we've just expanded some of the services to meet shift time, so they actually run up until they do the 6 a.m. ones and the 10 o'clock at night and stuff like that. So we've started that as a sort of pilot to see how that goes. But we are keen to work with employment areas, and that's one of the things we're looking at, as how do we do that through the enhanced partnership, because it is a key area that we want to improve bus services. We know that there used to be quite a few workers' buses in the old days, but those kind of have disappeared. I think continental shift patterns and various other things. So we are looking at that. Moving forwards, engagement with employers. We're working with sort of the people within the county council or the areas and that to try and engage them to see how we would best serve their needs. But yeah, I mean, we're open to all of this, and I think that's the key, isn't it? What we want to do is try and look at those areas where we know there's demand, and how do we meet that demand? So how do we get people out of cars, but how do we increase bus services? One thing employers have come to us and said is, we struggle to get young people or people into employment because they don't, ones who can't quite have a car at this point or can't afford a car and stuff like, but they can't get there by public transport. So those are the things we're trying to tackle with this, like I said. But yeah, so we're looking at that. We're looking at how we open those lines with communication, how we engage with them, and then what we can do in terms of supplying a service that meets those needs.
Sorry.
Could I pick up on
Yeah.
Councillor Gallagher's point? Because I think Councillor Gallagher knows probably very well what I'll be saying. But, I'm really pleased to hear about the employment activity. But, for example, one of the things that on the LC Whips I would have been interested to ask was how much employer engagement there is, because on Blackmore Park Road, for example, we've got, developing community of employment activity and employers. And for example, one employer, Lucart, has said that if there was a safe, active travel way to his factory, he could take 30 out of his 70 workforce, if I remember the numbers correctly, off the road and onto bikes. And similarly with the ZX LiDARs a little bit further down the road, and of course you've got 3 counties, but that is a very dangerous road, very fast, and not many people would be brave enough or perhaps foolish enough to cycle down that road regularly. So is that something you're looking at as well?
Yes, certainly in terms of the gathering information side of the LC Whips, the consultant will look at key origins and destinations, including employer, and looking at key trip attractors. So they would certainly be, in terms of identifying the routes, they're certainly required to look at those key movements, and certainly in terms of employer movements. I mean, you can use census data, but of course, really, census data is now 2011 because the census data 2021, because there's so many people working from home. It's not so useful in terms of transport data, but yeah, it's certainly something to look at, and as part of any further engagement on LC Whips, we'd be looking for all stakeholders to be involved.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Oh, sorry, Councillor Harrison. Sorry, I forgot.
Just a quick question, if I can, for Stuart. Sorry to pester you. Can you advise when Tenbury Wells is going to have the on-demand service?
We haven't got any dates for the exact rollout yet, but we'll try and get that out. Simply, like you said, we're basically, now we know we've got the funding, we're coming up with a plan of how that run rolls out. So it is in the plan. So things, but
I was very intrigued because I went up there at the beginning of January, and you're advertising it on the inside of your bus stops, all your covered things. It's on all of them, and flashes up for about 30 seconds. It wouldn't be a good idea, really, I don't think, to have that there.
I'll have to check on that. I didn't realise there was anything out there.
Oh, yes. And I've got the photos to prove it.
Yes, don't mess with Councillor Harrison. Right, thank you very much for your presentation. Much appreciated, and actually very informative. Very informative. Right, now we're going on to the Council's forward plan. Has anybody got any comments on that particular section of the agenda? Right, okay. We will leave that for now. I'm sure it's going to change anyway, with circumstances looming. And we will now look at the overview and scrutiny programme. There are a couple of alterations to that. First of all, there is going to be a meeting now on the 6th of May at 6 p.m. and that's going to be to have a presentation on the Community Safety Partnership as requested by Jen Taylor. And then there will be an additional meeting in June where we will be dealing with the implications of the national grid expansion. I'm just going on what Vic asked me to arrange. So we will be, I will get back to you about that if that's okay, and we can discuss that at the next meeting. Okay? And I think that's about it, unless anybody has got anything else to bring up. Right, brilliant. Thank you very much for coming tonight, and the next meeting is in February, and we will keep in touch to make sure that everything is up to date, and also some of the issues that were brought up during the pre-group meeting will also be discussed, and emails will be replied to. Okay?